I had never thought a family party could make me feel like I'd walked into someone else's story, but then she smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile that lingers in photographs or brightens a room artificially. It was quieter, knowing, like she had a secret she wasn't ready to share yet, and somehow she had chosen me as the witness. "Want to taste something sweeter?" she asked, her voice calm, low, just hovering above the hum of conversations and clinking glasses. I froze for a second, caught somewhere between confusion and curiosity. The kitchen smelled faintly of roasted chicken and sugar cookies, but the warmth wasn't in the air. It was in the way she held the plate, balanced delicately on her palms, her fingers brushing against the edge just enough for me to notice. I nodded, awkwardly, fumbling my words like I hadn't rehearsed what to say in years. Her eyes, green, flecked with something amber when the light hit, watched me like she was cataloging the way I hesitated. There was a calm confidence in her posture, the kind that made you think she'd mastered herself long before anyone else had even noticed. She tilted her head slightly, and I swear I saw a faint glimmer of amusement, like she already knew I was going to overthink the whole moment. I took the small piece she offered, and somehow the act of holding it between my fingers felt intimate in a way that didn't make sense. My hand trembled slightly, and she didn't pull back. She didn't flinch or step away. She just watched me, her gaze patient, unhurried, as if time itself had slowed down for a heartbeat. I tried to make small talk, because that's what people do when they're nervous. These look really good," I mumbled, and immediately wanted to hide in the corner. She laughed softly, not a laugh that filled the room, just a quiet sound that made my chest tighten. "Careful," she said. "They might spoil your appetite." There was nothing teasing in it, really. Just a subtle acknowledgement, like she was letting me in on something private without saying much at all. The music in the background faded into a blur because I couldn't stop noticing the little details. The way her hair fell over one shoulder, the way she leaned against the counter with one hip cocked just slightly, casual but deliberate. She smelled faintly of something warm and comforting, a mix of vanilla and a scent I couldn't place, but it stayed with me long after she turned to walk away. I wanted to say something, anything, but all that came out was, "Thanks," and it sounded hollow in my own ears. She didn't look back, not immediately, but I caught her glance over her shoulder, just once, lingering longer than necessary. That one look, it was heavy with something I couldn't define. Curiosity? Amusement? Maybe even a tiny, hidden challenge. And then she was gone, slipping into a conversation with someone else, her presence leaving a gap I wasn't sure how to fill. I stood there for a moment, holding the sweet in my hand, tasting it without tasting it, lost in the way the world felt slightly off balance, slightly more alive, because she had been in it for just one small, electric moment. I couldn't stop thinking about that smile, the quiet confidence behind it, the way she had made something as ordinary as offering a plate of sweets feel like an invitation into a story I hadn't realized I wanted to be a part of. And the worst, or maybe the best, part was that I didn't know if I wanted to say yes or just keep standing there, tasting nothing but the memory of her gaze. I found myself volunteering to help her carry boxes down the narrow aisle of the bookstore, mostly because my hands itched for something to do other than stare at her across the room. She moved with a kind of precise efficiency that made the chaos around us feel slower, almost muted. Each step she took was measured, controlled, as if she didn't want to spill even a shadow of herself onto the floor. "You don't have to do this," she said softly, not looking at me, her voice carrying a trace of fatigue I hadn't noticed before. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, a subtle gesture that spoke louder than words. I paused mid-step, caught between offering to take more weight and not wanting to overstep. Her hands rested on the edge of a box, fingers brushing against the cardboard just so. I couldn't help noticing the way her knuckles were faintly pale, the subtle way she flexed her fingers before gripping again. I had no reason to study her like this, and yet every micromotion pulled my attention in, like gravity had shifted toward her. "You've been busy," I said, trying to sound casual, though my throat had gone dry. She chuckled lightly, a sound that didn't reach her eyes, and it made my chest ache for a reason I couldn't explain. It was a soft laugh, tired, layered with something unsaid. She had the kind of energy that demanded attention even when it wasn't asking for it, and I was powerless to look away. She paused halfway down the aisle, her hands on the box, just standing there for a moment too long. I realized she wasn't breathing normally. Her shoulders had stiffened, her jaw tight. Something flickered behind her eyes. Hesitation, doubt, maybe a memory she wasn't ready to share. I wanted to ask, to offer something, but the words lodged in my chest like small stones. I didn't sleep well last night, she admitted finally, almost inaudibly. She glanced at me then, quick, fleeting, and I caught it. The barest hint of vulnerability that made her seem human in a way that startled me. My hand itched to brush against hers, to say something that could make her feel lighter, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch, letting her vulnerability hover between us. We reached the end of the aisle, and for a moment, our movements synchronized. She lifted the box onto the counter, and I instinctively mirrored her posture just a fraction too close, aware of the warmth radiating from her side. I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she set the box down, and my chest tightened again, a quiet, forbidden pull that I had no right to follow. She looked at me then, and for one heartbeat, something shifted in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that we had noticed each other beyond the polite veneer. Her eyes lingered on mine for just a second too long, and she smiled faintly, almost apologetically, before turning away. That smile, gentle, measured, but charged with some quiet energy, stayed with me far longer than it should have. I stood there for a moment, feeling the hum of it, the small, forbidden pull that neither of us could, or maybe would, name aloud. And I realized, with a shiver, that I was caught in it already. The rain had started quietly at first, tapping against the large windows of the cafe where we'd ended up after the bookstore closed. Steam curled from my cup, but it barely warmed me. She sat across from me, shoulders tense, holding her own mug like it was a lifeline. The dim light made the room feel smaller, more intimate than it probably was, and I realized I could count the tiny freckles along her knuckles if I just looked closely enough. We hadn't spoken much since the boxes earlier, but the quiet wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, like the air before a storm. I wanted to say something meaningful, but every time I opened my mouth, the words stumbled halfway out and fell flat. Instead, I watched her fingers wrap around the mug, flex, release, flex again. Each movement was deliberate, careful, and I couldn't stop noticing how even the smallest gestures felt like messages I wasn't sure I was allowed to read. "You should probably get home," she said suddenly, her voice breaking the silence, almost too casual. She kept her eyes on her drink, but her words were edged with something softer, hesitation, maybe, or guilt. My chest tightened. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that I could stay, that I wanted to, but I held back. I couldn't. Not yet. A phone buzzed on the table, sharp against the soft hum of the cafe. She glanced at it, exhaled, and pressed ignore. A message from someone I didn't know, but one she clearly wanted me to notice she was ignoring. There was a quick flicker of tension in her jaw, a subtle bite of her lip. I didn't ask who it was. I didn't need to. That hesitation alone said enough. The storm outside intensified, and the sound of rain against the glass became a kind of soundtrack to everything unsaid between us. She leaned slightly forward, elbows on the table, and I found myself leaning in without realizing it, drawn closer by some gravity neither of us had claimed. Her hair fell forward, brushing the side of her face, and I caught a hint of vanilla and something warmer, something intimate in the air around her. We were almost touching, just a fraction of a breath away, a whisper of warmth separating us. I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, almost daring me, almost asking me to cross a line I wasn't sure I had the right to cross. My hand itched to reach for hers, to close that distance, but restraint anchored me in place. I had no right to move first, and maybe I was too scared to. The door opened suddenly, letting in a gust of wet wind, and a friend of hers stepped inside, breaking the fragile tension like glass under pressure. She pulled back, smiled at her friend, and suddenly the distance between us felt infinite. My heart was still hammering, but the moment was gone, slipping into memory before it could even be claimed. I sipped my coffee, tasting bitterness I didn't want, wishing I had acted, wishing I hadn't waited. And when I looked back at her, she caught my gaze, just for a second, before looking away again. That fraction of a second, the way her eyes had lingered on mine, full of something unnamed, was enough to make me shiver, to make me wonder if I'd ever get another chance. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes after I found her in the quiet corner of the hotel lounge, the hum of the air conditioning filling the spaces between us. She was staring out the window, rain streaking the glass in long, lazy lines, and I felt the weight of the unspoken pressing down like a hand on my chest. Finally, she turned slightly, not meeting my eyes, just tilting her head. "Do you ever wonder what we're doing?" Her voice was low, uneven, like she was testing it, tasting the words before letting them go. I wanted to answer, wanted to say anything, but my throat went dry. I could feel her watching me, carefully, almost afraid I'd say the wrong thing, almost afraid I'd say the right thing. Her hands rested in her lap, tight against each other, fingers intertwined like they were holding onto a secret she couldn't release. "I mean, this," she continued, finally looking at me, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. "Us. All of this. It doesn't feel normal." The word hung there between us, heavy, impossible to ignore. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach across the table, to bridge the distance, but something, fear, maybe, or restraint, kept me anchored in place. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hand as she shifted, the faint crease in her forehead as she tried to steady herself. She was holding back, I realized, holding back everything, the same way I was holding myself back from saying too much, or maybe from saying too little. "I'm tired of pretending," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, back to the rain, and I felt the air between us pulse with the weight of it. Every unspoken word, every glance I'd caught over the past weeks, every hesitant smile, they were all there, raw and impossible to ignore. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I felt it too, but the words dissolved before they could reach my lips. Instead, I just leaned back slightly, hands folded, pretending the silence could somehow explain what I couldn't say. Her eyes kept finding mine, searching for an answer that didn't exist yet. She let out a soft exhale, a sound that carried both relief and despair. "Maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we're just," she trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. The pause stretched on, and I realized neither of us had the words, or the courage, to fill it. I wanted to ask her to stay, to explain herself, to let me explain myself, but even that seemed impossible. All I could do was watch, and feel, and hope she didn't vanish before I could even understand what I was feeling. And then she whispered, almost to herself, almost to the air, but I caught every word. "I don't want to ruin everything, but I can't keep pretending either." The words landed like a stone in the middle of my chest. I couldn't move, couldn't respond, because for the first time, the truth between us wasn't hidden behind smiles or stolen glances. It was raw. It was devastating. And somehow, impossibly, it was also magnetic. She handed me a small envelope without a word. The paper was thick, slightly yellowed, with neat handwriting that wasn't hers. I felt my fingers brush hers for just a moment as I took it, and the spark of contact lingered far longer than it should have. "I found it the other day," she said quietly, her voice almost lost under the hum of the afternoon traffic outside. She didn't look at me, didn't even meet my eyes. She was staring at a spot on the carpet like it held the answer to something she wasn't ready to say aloud. I opened it slowly, unfolding the letter inside. The words were simple, but the way they were written, each one carefully placed, carried a weight I could almost feel pressing against my chest. It spoke of love lost, of promises broken, of someone she had adored and who had disappeared from her life too soon. Her hands were trembling slightly as she watched me read, as if she was letting me witness something intimate, something sacred. "I never really talked about him," she admitted, voice breaking softly. "Not to anyone. And then one day, he just wasn't there anymore." She finally looked up at me, and I saw it in her eyes, a mix of sorrow and stubborn pride, the kind that shields you from pain but also keeps you isolated. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I understood, that I could be here, but words felt cheap next to the quiet devastation in her gaze. Instead, I just reached out, letting my hand hover near hers, not touching yet, just presence, like a lifeline across a table. You remind me of him, in a way, she said after a long pause. Not in appearance, not in voice, but in the way I listened, the way I noticed. The way I didn't let the world rush past without seeing the small details. Her shoulders slumped slightly, as if admitting that connection was both comforting and terrifying. I could feel my chest tighten, my mind racing with the impossibility of it. I wasn't him. I never could be. And yet, for some fragile moment, I realized that she was letting me step into a part of her she hadn't shared with anyone else. That was terrifying, and it was magnetic. She picked up the envelope again, tracing the edges with her fingers as if she could memorize the weight of it. I never wanted to let anyone in not like that. And I don't know why I'm telling you now. Her voice was barely audible, raw and unpolished, stripped of the careful control she usually maintained. The rain started tapping harder against the window, and I felt like the room had shrunk around us. We were suspended in a bubble of quiet, and the world outside seemed distant, irrelevant. I wanted to lean in, to say something that could soothe the ache in her chest, but I knew some things couldn't be fixed with words. She let out a soft sigh and looked at me again, her eyes glistening but steady. I'm not ready, but maybe I could be someday. I didn't move, didn't speak, because that single sentence, hesitant, trembling, full of unspoken longing, felt like a seismic shift beneath my ribs. I could feel the ground changing under us, subtle, slow, but impossible to ignore. And for the first time, I realized that nothing between us would ever be the same again. We sat together in the corner of the little cafe where the world outside had been reduced to rain and muffled traffic. She didn't speak at first, just sipped her coffee and stared out the window, letting the steam curl into the quiet between us. I didn't speak either, and somehow that felt enough. After a while, she shifted slightly, leaning closer than before, not enough to be intimate, but enough that I felt the warmth radiating from her shoulder. Her hand brushed against mine. Accidental, she would probably say, but neither of us moved it away. The touch lingered, light and grounding, and I realized that it wasn't about rushing or dramatic declarations. It was about being here, right now, together. I don't know what this is, she said softly, finally breaking the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was something fragile beneath it, like a hidden tremor she didn't want me to catch. I tilted my head toward her, trying to find the words that could match the quiet understanding between us. Maybe it doesn't need a name, I said, letting the sentence hang there. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't brave. It was honest. It was simple. Her eyes met mine for just a second longer than expected, and in that glance, I felt the culmination of everything we'd built. The stolen glances, the hesitant touches, the confessions half shared, the letters, the silences. All of it had led to this ordinary, unremarkable moment, and yet it was extraordinary in its quiet inevitability. She let out a soft laugh, almost breathless, and I could hear the tension leaving her shoulders in that single sound. I guess we're just here, she said, half smiling, her fingers tightening slightly over the handle of her cup. Yes, I said, and it was enough. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't a declaration. It was acknowledgement, recognition, the tacit agreement that whatever this was, whatever we had been feeling, it had been earned, slowly, in pieces, in pauses and silences, in moments too small for anyone else to notice. She leaned back, finally letting herself exhale, and I mirrored her, sitting still, content in the simplicity of the space we shared. Our knees brushed lightly beneath the table, accidental and fleeting, but it carried weight I could feel all the way to my chest. For the first time, the storm outside felt distant, like it had nothing to do with us. And I realized that I wasn't chasing her anymore, and she wasn't retreating from me. We were simply here, together, in a way that had been impossible a week ago, a month ago, but inevitable now. Her fingers brushed mine once more, this time not by accident, and I didn't pull away. The contact was quiet, deliberate, and it said everything neither of us could say aloud. Patience, understanding, a fragile but undeniable connection. We didn't speak after that, because there was nothing left to say. The quiet between us was full, solid, and satisfying. And as I watched her take a slow sip from her cup, I realized that nothing had exploded, nothing had changed dramatically, and yet everything had shifted. It was final, not in the sense of endings, but in the sense of arrival. We were here, and it was enough. It's strange, looking back now. Sitting here with a quiet cup of coffee, the rain just a memory on the window pane, I realize how much changed in the span of a few weeks, though at the time, it didn't feel like anything monumental was happening at all. It was small, careful, quiet. And yet, somehow, it reshaped everything. I've learned that noticing someone, their small habits, their silences, the way they breathe when they think no one is watching, can be its own kind of intimacy. That sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or confessions shouted across rooftops. Sometimes it slips in softly, through a brush of fingers, a shared look, a pause that says more than words ever could. She's changed too, though I think she would be the first to deny it. I see her now, still poised, still careful, but with the faintest trace of ease in her shoulders, a quiet permission to lean into life, and into me, without guilt or fear. And me? I've learned patience, restraint, and the kind of attentiveness that feels like devotion without pressure. We don't label what this is, and we never will. We don't need to. There's a safety in knowing that our connection isn't a fairy tale, isn't a checklist of milestones or expectations. It's ours, fragile, earned, and undeniably real. And there's something beautiful in that kind of love, the slow kind that builds in silence, the kind that stays when the storms have passed. Sometimes, I catch myself remembering the first time she smiled at me with that quiet, knowing glance, the one that started all of this. And I realize how fragile everything was at the beginning, how unsure, how forbidden it felt, and yet how inevitable it became. The memory doesn't sting or ache anymore. It hums, steady and warm, like a heartbeat I can finally trust. There are no grand gestures in our story, no cinematic declarations. But there are hands that brush together without hesitation, quiet afternoons that stretch into evenings, and the rare, perfect moments when the world shrinks to just the two of us. That's enough. That's everything. And maybe that's the lesson here. Love doesn't need perfection. It doesn't need timing to be perfect. It just needs honesty, patience, and the courage to be seen in the smallest, most vulnerable ways. I glance at her across the table now, fingers lightly resting near mine, and she looks up, catches my eye, and smiles. A simple, quiet smile that says more than words ever could. And I know, without needing to say it, that we've arrived somewhere both terrifying and wonderful. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?